All right. So it's 10 o'clock here on Wednesday, and my name is Peter Hooper. I'm the 4-H area agent for Cochise and Santa Cruz counties, and welcome you guys to today for our STEM in agriculture, our science in agriculture presentation. Have you ever thought about how ice cream got made? Let's explore the dairy industry in Arizona and beyond and learn how delicious products get made through a trip through the process of getting milk from the farm to your bowl. Dr. Duarte Diaz, Associate Professor and Dairy Extension Specialist at the University of Arizona, will walk us through one of the most important ag industries in Arizona. Dr. Diaz?
Well, thank you very much. Good morning to all of you that are not involved in the dairy industry, and good afternoon to those that are actually involved in the dairy industry. And for those that have actually worked in a dairy, they would understand that typically things start around 4 in the morning in a dairy operation. So this would be almost half day of work. So thank you for joining me here today. I'm going to try to give you a broad understanding of what the dairy industry is in the state of Arizona, with some comments about how that compares to global dairy industries, both from the production and the breeds and the products produced. Oh, I was using the wrong one. The dairy industry is a pretty diverse group of industries that are all working together to produce and provide these products that we are all so fond of. It typically is consisted of the milk producers. The milk producers can be a broad group of a broad component of the industry, because it also includes people that are producing products and feeds that are going to be utilized in the dairy industry. So it could be people that are just producing hay or corn that is going to be used in the dairy industry. We have things like dairy co-ops or dairy cooperatives that are basically a group of producers that are using their collective power or their collective numbers to actually make decisions and make financial decisions that allows them to be more competitive in the landscape. We have these things that we call the processors or manufacturers, where the milk is typically taken to and processed and converted into the dairy products that we all know, right? We get from the cow the milk. The milk is either converted into fluid milk, or the gallon of milk that we drink in the supermarket, or a plethora of different products that we enjoy, everything from cheese sticks to the aforementioned ice cream. After that, there's also, in that component of the industry, there's the firms that market milk and milk products. So again, for the most part in the United States, milk is not marketed individually in brands. In some other countries it is. Arizona is peculiar because we have one of the few national brands, which is Shamrock Farms or Shamrock Milk. Shamrock Milk is the example of one dairy operation that produces, processes, manufactures, and markets their product independently. You've probably seen them in Subway. They have a national contract with Subway, so Shamrock Milk from Arizona is actually sold nationally. The dairy industry accounts about 35 billion cash receipts in 2014. Seems like a really large number, but we only rank about 4 in the livestock component, behind meat animals, feed crops, and poultry and eggs. Now, keep in mind that the dairy industry, when we look at the numbers of the dairy industry, we're only looking at one component, which is the fluid milk, the milk that comes out of these animals. The dairy industry has also increasing interest in the cattle industry, obviously, because we generate replacements, right? For every 1,000 cows in a dairy herd, there's 500 replacement animals looking to get into that herd at some point. So those would go into the cattle number in some operations. And the other one is obviously these feed crops that are, the second, third largest industry. A lot of those crops are being utilized also to feed dairy cattle. Of all the livestock industries, dairy cows are probably have the highest daily intake of feed, right? If you compare how much a cow will eat versus a chicken or a pig, or even a beef cattle, dairy cattle have a significant increase in intake. So just to give you a little bit of perspective of the economics, again, there's not going to be a take-home quiz or anything like that on this. Just so you get a better understanding of how Arizona cash receipts or agricultural production ranks in the state. The table here on the left actually tells you the products, the top 10 products in cash receipts from the Economic Research Service in 2018. As you can see, the number one commodity in the state of Arizona is lettuce, followed very closely by cattle and calves, and third by dairy products. These numbers can be a little bit misleading because the reality is it's a big component of that calf and calves is associated with the dairy industry, especially in Arizona. The vast majority of the feedlot cattle in Arizona are Holstein cattle. Therefore, these are cattle that are utilized, they're being mobilized from the dairy industry into the beef industry, right? So they're serving their secondary purpose in that process. So, and then if you start going a little bit further down, especially if you look at things like hay and miscellaneous crops, a lot of those crops produced in the state, especially hay, is going into the dairy industry. So if you take the production of all these ingredients and all these components of the dairy industry, it's quite likely that the dairy industry is actually the most important cash receipt industry in the state. These 10 industries here, as you can see, the cumulative percentage is that left-hand side of that table, account about 90% of the cash receipts. So these 10 industries here are pretty much the vast majority of the industrial cash receipts, agriculture and cash receipts in this state. The pie chart on the right-hand side is basically just those 10 divided into 100%. So again, 30% of our of that industry of the top 10 is in lettuce, and 27 and 16 are in cattle and dairy products. But again, just to give you an idea, almost 50% of our agricultural cash receipts are focused on ruminant production on both beef cattle and dairy cattle. So very important to the state, very important to the agriculture of the state. Milk is produced and manufactured in every state. And this is the kind of part of the presentation where if we were live, I would be asking you, why do you think that is? I'm going to go ahead and tell you the reason why milk is produced in every state is because it's a perishable item. It needs to be close to the consumers. So we have to have production at some proximity to the population. Half of the...
Dr. Diaz?
Yes.
We have a question from one of the attendees. Wants to know, is soap considered a dairy product?
Dairy components, dairy components are used in a number of industries, everything from manufacture of food, like a food stabilizer, to soaps. Some soaps actually are utilizing some drugs use with stabilizing agents that are dairy-based products. They're a smaller percentage of the total income of the dairy industry, but yes, dairy products are used for a lot of different things. I think I may have a slide here at some point that actually shows that, but if not, again, we can brainstorm about that. I usually have a component where people I start asking people about commodities or things that they use in their house, and we start identifying where you can find dairy products, right? I mean, gummy bears is the grain known for a lot of people. But over half the total production comes from 5 very important dairy states: Wisconsin, California, New York, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. There's a couple of reasons why this occurs. First of all, California and New York are top dairy states because they have very large populations. So again, we need to have that milk close to those population centers so that we can feed that population. Wisconsin and Minnesota are also peculiar in that sense because they may not have very large populations, but they have a lot of land availability and land that is favorable for agricultural production. So again, they provide those milk and milk products for the center of the state, but they also tend to focus on the component of the dairy industry that is less perishable, which is the cheeses, the other products that have a larger stability. A couple of fun facts. A cow can produce up to 8 gallons of milk a day. Okay, that's an average cow. Okay, that comes out to about 125 glasses of milk. Okay, an average Holstein And again, this is the part where I would ask you if you guys know what a Holstein is, but again, the greatest reference of a Holstein we've ever gotten is from the Chick-fil-A commercial, right? The black and white cow, the famous black and white cow. An average Holstein weighs around 1,500 pounds, okay? Looks skinny, but she's not light. A cow can consume over 100 pounds of feed and drink about 50 gallons of water, okay, in a day. More milk is produced today with 9 million cows than in 1950 with 26 million cows. Okay, think about that for a second. What has happened in that time frame? What has happened in 50 to 70 years? We've become much more efficient at feeding animals and getting more production. We have selected the genetic traits that are favorable for milk production, and we have built facilities and establishment that are optimizing the production of milk. So now we are producing more milk now with a third of the animals that we had in the 50s. It only takes 2 days for milk to go from the farm to the processing plant to the supermarket. So the milk you see on your supermarket has at most taken a 2-day trip, right? It's pretty efficient process to get milk from the cow into the plant, into your supermarket. So let's talk a little bit about milk. Milk is a great product, right? I mean, it's mostly consists of water. It's about 87% water. That's about a 5% component of carbohydrates. The one that we always are really cognizant of, the one's called lactose. It has on average around 3.5% fat, and it has about 3.3% of protein in the. It also consists of some minerals and some minor biological proteins and enzymes. Lactose, the milk sugar, is actually made up of glucose and galactose actually bundled together. And that bundle needs to be broken apart by an enzyme called lactase in the small intestine. And that enzyme is not always in high numbers in some populations around the world. And it typically is these populations that have not had a historical consumption of milk. So that is what leads to a lot of people have what's often called lactose intolerance. And that is a lack of these enzymes to be able to break that enzyme in their small intestine. Actually, most people all people have some level of lactose. It's just that component, the concentration that's going to really make the difference between somebody who's lactose tolerant or lactose intolerant. As I spoke briefly, every state in the United States produces milk. This table right here is from a popular magazine called Progressive Dairyman, and it really states, and it really showcases the demographics of milk production. On top here, in this little pie graphs on the top, you can see the regional distribution, right, from northwest to southwest. You can see that the western part of the United States is a pretty powerful region for milk production. And again, we can talk about those details. Part of it is the population. Also, part of it is the topography and the expansive land available for the production. In the West, we have some very important dairy states, obviously California being the #1 producer, but also having states like Idaho, which is #3, Texas, which is #6, and New Mexico, which is in the top 10. We'll talk a little bit about where Arizona sits in here, but I'm just trying to give you a overall picture of what the dairy industry looks. If you start looking at the Midwestern state or the Midwest, there are some very important states, like we mentioned before. Both Wisconsin and Minnesota sit well within the top 10. Obviously, Michigan is a very important dairy state too. And then we have a good group of states like Indiana, Iowa, that are and Kansas that are strong dairy producing states. But the real contribution to the dairy industry from the Midwest is the production of corn. Most of you guys will know that we consider that the Corn Belt, and that is with the vast majority of the corn being produced in the United States. And that corn travels from the Midwest to every region where dairy production is being done in the United States, because corn is by far the most important ingredient in dairy production in our system. But again, every state, including Hawaii, has a significant contribution. Obviously, it's a little harder for states, smaller states like Hawaii and Alaska to be efficient in production. Alaska more for the climate. Hawaii because of the difficulty in getting commodities into those areas. But again, gives you a good picture of that. In the eastern side of the United States, you see that the large population states end up having the largest contribution. New York, Pennsylvania, like we spoke recently. Also, Florida is a fairly important dairy state. Vermont is historically known as a dairy state. Again, it's the home of Ben and Jerry's ice creams that you guys are all probably fairly familiar with. So Arizona, where do we rank? How do we sit in this national ranking? So here's the image from that other slide, and I'm going to use this one from down here from Wisconsin as the number 2 dairy state to give you some interesting facts and comparisons about the dairy industry in Arizona versus the dairy industry in some of these other states. And here on the top, this number right here actually gives us the state ranking. Okay, so you can tell here Wisconsin is number 2, New York is number 4. Arizona ranks anywhere from 12 to 14, consistently in the top 15, depending on what things are happening. And that, again, that just gives you a perspective. We're not the largest state, but we're a pretty significant dairy state. The other thing, numbers that are really, really interesting is if you look at this number right here that says number 2, that is actually the herd size, the average herd size. So if you compare to Wisconsin, Wisconsin ranks number 35 in average herd size, and an average dairy herd in the state of Wisconsin has 124 cows. If you compare that to Arizona, an average herd in Arizona has almost 2,000 cows. There really are very few small dairy operations in Arizona. Actually, operations that are under 1,000 cows, which would be considered large in other states, are considered small in the state of Arizona. You may ask why. The primary reason in Arizona is because we have to cool cows. It is definitely a lot more economic to build these large structures with cooling systems and hold a lot of cattle in there. That efficiency of production in that size is very important. The other number that is really, really interesting is Arizona actually ranks number 4 in average milk production. Okay, milk per cow. So we are producing about 24,000 pounds of milk per cow. Okay, again, compare it to New York and Wisconsin, which are top dairy states. They're ranking 11 and 15. So the real question here is, how can we in the desert have such big farms with such high production? And again, the answer to that question I gave to you already is the fact that in Arizona, because the climate is so hot, it is very worthwhile to invest in cooling systems to keep those animals at a good ambient temperature. So compare that to a state like Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin has all their 4 seasons. They will have really cold climate in the winter. They may have to do some things to control that environment so the cows don't get impacted by the coldness. And then in the summer, they get these spikes in high temperatures. If they were to invest in cooling of those cows, that investment would only be used for that 1 month or 2 months where they have high temperatures. In Arizona, guess what? We got 12 months of summer. So we get to invest in that infrastructure to cool those cows. And we normally use that cooling system anywhere from 9 to 10 months of the year, right? There's some times in the year where it does get cooled down enough that animals can be comfortable at ambient temperature. So those 2 things are the reasons why we have such a high production and also such a high number of dairy operations. Again, this is a really quick comparison. In Arizona, we have about 90-something herds, 100 in this diagram. Wisconsin has 10,000 dairy herds, right? I mean, just really big difference how our industries line up. The other thing that's really interesting for you guys to understand is that Arizona has also some of the most important dairy counties in the United States. Most of you that are familiar with the dairy industry would know that a lot of the milk is produced in the central Arizona area. We'll talk a little bit about the why of that, but if you look at this diagram right here that ranks the top dairy counties in the United States, you would see that California has some really powerful dairy counties. Idaho also is the only state that would have, the only two states that would have higher concentration counties than Arizona. But here at 9, Maricopa County is the 9th highest dairy county in the United States, and Pinal County sits just below at 13. So that's pretty interesting fact. And what really that tells you is that a lot of our industries are very close, consolidated to each other. There's a really good reason for that, and it's because the plant is also in Phoenix. So the distance that the milk has to travel from the dairy operation, to the plant is a limited one, right? It would not make a lot of sense to have a plant in Yuma and have all our milk being produced in Phoenix, right? That wouldn't be efficient for that system. There's another reason why most of the dairy operations in this state are in Maricopa and Pinal. And again, this is another place where I would ask the question, why do you think that is? And there's a really obvious reason why most of the milk is produced in Maricopa and Pinal. It's because Phoenix is right smack in the middle of it, right? Phoenix is one of the largest cities in the United States. It's in the top 10 of largest cities in the United States. And therefore, it makes sense to have a lot of the milk produced that that population is going to consume close to that population, right? We have, obviously Tucson further south, and then we have some other population centers in the state, but the vast majority of the population of the state is concentrated around that greater Phoenix metropolitan area. So that makes a lot of sense to have the milk at some level, at some proximity. As I mentioned before, the Southwest is a very important region for milk production. We produce about 1/3 of the milk in the United States in this region of the U.S. So let's talk about how we compare globally and how other countries and our other economies compare to us. The European Union is the #1 producer of milk as a region. That's kind of really a unfair comparison, because the European Union obviously is a bunch of countries, and we're comparing it to the United States as a sole country. So that's not a really good comparison. If you wanted to say North America, then you would have to combine United States, Mexico, and Canada, and then we would be probably the largest milk producing region in the world. But the United States ranks #2 in milk production around the world, and we have a pretty diverse milk industry. We consume a lot of the product, but we're also very large exporters of dairy products to the rest of the world. So you look here, there's a good divide on how many things we export. The vast majority of the dairy products produced, that the imports of the dairy products in the United States are for export. So we produce a lot of dairy components that actually get sent to other countries, whether that be actually products themselves that go to China and Mexico and some of the other large partners, or they're components of those products. But we also are an importer of dairy products, and that's a really interesting question. You would say, if we're the top producing country in the world, why would we be importing our products back into the United States? Well, there is a large component of the industry that produces specialized products. Again, your question about the soap, but more specifically about food stabilizing agents, right? Medical products. Maybe some of you guys have heard of protein shakes that athletes will drink to maintain. Those are actually milk components that are dehydrated and separated and then combined to make specific need products. There's other countries that are really good at doing that, and we depend on that specialized market to actually bring those products. So again, if you look at the top countries we export to, I mentioned it already, the top 2 countries would be Mexico and China. Canada is a big exporter, and then Asia in general is the other large region, or Southeastern Asia. Who do we buy dairy products from? Well, primarily New Zealand. New Zealand is the country that produces the largest markets of whey protein or milk component, dehydrated milk components. So they're bought back into the United States and put into specialty products, like I mentioned before. The biggest market probably would be something like a protein shake that you would see in a store. But yeah, we do get fractions of specialized products from different countries. Sometimes is because they are producing a specific thing that we need for an industry.
Dr. Diaz?
Yes.
Going back to where you were talking about the different states, We have a question from an attendee about California and where California rates on the states. The attendee was asking because when driving through California, they see a lot of farms, dairy farms, coming up from on their way to going through San Diego and such. So where does California rank?
Well, California is a top dairy state by far.
Okay.
It is consistently competing with Wisconsin for production, but they're very different states. So the comparison with California and Wisconsin is very similar to our comparison with New York, right, or with Wisconsin. California has large dairy herds. They rank number 5 typically on average herd size. They're about 1,300, 1,400 size in their herds. They're usually also fairly high in milk production because they're these, these high efficiency systems. But California is by far the king of dairy production in the United States.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Diaz.
No problem. See if I remember where I was. Yeah. So again, let's jump into a little bit of a different side of the industry. We talked a little bit about the economics and the geography of the industry. Let's talk a little bit about the specifics. I told you guys a little while ago that obviously the most iconic dairy image that a lot of people have is this a dairy cow that appears in the Chick-fil-A commercials. And again, I think it's been actually fairly productive image because a lot of people don't really understand that the reason why the cow is asking you to eat more chicken is because dairy cows are typically a large component of the ground beef market, right? Once cows finish their productive cycle in milk production, they are moved into a feedlot and processed eventually for ground beef, the vast majority of that market. So the Holstein cow is probably, it's by far the most important breed of cattle in the dairy industry in the United States. I would say off as much as 80% of the dairy cattle in the States are Holstein. The second most important breed of cattle is the Jersey cow. Jersey cows are actually pretty popular in areas where they specialized in not volume of milk, but components of milk. They produce a much higher milk fat concentration. And so in areas where, like Wisconsin, where you're getting paid for those components because you're making cheese and other products, Jersey and other of these high fat breeds are a lot more common. But in general terms, the Holstein is the most important breed. We have a couple of other breeds that are commonly seen: Ayrshire, the Brown Swiss, the Guernsey, and the Milking Shorthorn. If any of you guys have ever gone to the Wisconsin World Dairy Expo, you would see that there is really a lot of companies that specialize in the genetics in all of these breeds. But the reality is that if you travel to a lot of dairy operations in and out of the United States, the vast majority of the cattle you would be exposed to would be Holstein. Not that they're better or worse than any other breed; they just produce different. Their focus is different in their production system. So by nature of the size of the cow and the intake of the cow, so the size of the digestive tract, and the total milk volume produced for that system, the Holstein is a high milk volume producing cow. And in most of those markets, you're getting paid for volume, so the Holsteins become a fairly common breed. Anyone of you guys have showed animals will know that obviously there are some very distinct anatomical features of the dairy cow, especially as it compares to beef cattle. A lot of the kids that do judging that go from a dairy cow to a beef cow will automatically underscore a dairy cow because they will look really, really skinny to them. The reason dairy cows are fairly skinny is because when they go through their lactation cycle, they actually have to mobilize body tissue to compensate for milk production. I'll talk about that a little bit when we get to nutrition. But it's a fascinating process where they are actually mobilizing some of their fat stores to make more milk. That's their commitment to making milk. And the cow doesn't really know that she's making milk for us. She's making milk to the parlor, and she's actually making milk for her calves, right? I mean, and that's the important component. But the components and the anatomy of a dairy cow is exactly the same as it would be for a beef cattle. Obviously, the very characteristic trait is the size of the udder, right? I mean, the size of the udder in a high-producing dairy cow is pretty pronounced, pretty significant, and it's very difficult to miss as a characteristic. So when you look at a dairy cow scorecard, again, if you're used to judging beef cattle or any other meat-bearing meats, you would see some pretty interesting differences, right? Dairy characteristic is one that you don't see in other sides, but it has all these. It has to do with all these properties that are actually associated with the potential productivity of that animal. So it includes things like ribs, thighs, and withers and skin. Obviously, there is a 40% of the scorecard that is associated with the udder. Again, keep in mind that what this animal is doing is producing milk. That's his job. And the udder is the primary functional organ for production, at least visible, right? We can't forget that the digestive tract and the and the other organs are very important. Feet and legs are pretty important too. Again, this is the part where I would actually ask people why, but the reality is you have to understand that cattle need to move from wherever they're eating to the milking parlor 2 times or 3 times a day to get milk. So we need animals that have good feed characteristics, and they can actually move throughout. The body composition or the body capacity is much more much less significant than it would be in meat producing animals. So the production systems in the dairy are also extremely diverse, right? I mean, we get things like grazing systems, not very common in Arizona or in the high desert, but it's one of the production systems that is commonly associated with the dairy industry. We have these where there are rotational grazing or free range. Again, we see with range cattle. Again, we have some range cattle on the state. And then we have what we call supplemental grazing, which is, again, a cow on a grazing on a pasture, but that gets additional feed to support high milk production. What we see in the United States primarily is what we call this TMR-based system. TMR stands for Total Mixed Ration. And basically, the analogy of a TMR is a salad bar where you don't get to make your own salad. Okay, so we have these commodity bins that are our salad bar, and we have a person that comes in every day and mixes a little bit of lettuce, a little bit of tomato, a little bit of carrots, a little bit of other ingredients to make the perfect salad. And that's what our cows eat on a daily basis, right? This pre-made salad. Most of our cows are in what we call a freestall system. And again, I'll show you some pictures. But in Arizona, the vast majority of the cattle are in what we call dry lots, which is an open lot where they have some roofing and protection from the elements. But for the most part, they have this large lot that they can move around. The reason why that is very efficient and popular in Arizona is because the sun is a very good ally in our system. We can put manure out to dry and to decompose and to stop some of the bacterial growth by just merely exposing it to the sun. In states where there's a lot of rain and maybe not as consistent as the sunshine, that is very difficult to do.
Dr. Diaz?
Yes.
We have a question about when dairy cows give birth, is it harder for them since they are skinnier? And if I could also just make an announcement to the group, I can see all questions, but you can't see each other's questions. That's part of the way this is set up. But yes, okay. So as far as dairy cows being skinnier, is it harder for them to give birth?
So here's the thing: when the dairy cow is at its skinniest is when she's producing the most milk. And that would be postpartum. So she would be at her actually heaviest or most body composition right prior to giving birth. The problem is that for us, again, for anybody who's used to looking at a beef cattle, she'll look skinny still in comparison to a beef cattle, but she'll have good composition right before giving birth. So in general terms, in our comparative terms, cows are really not skinny right before calving. The thing is that our dairy industry produces really, really large cows, and in return, they produce fairly large calves. So out of all the cattle industry, especially with the hosting production, calving can be a difficult process for hosting cattle. And we tend to see a little bit more problems in calving in the dairy industry than we would see in, you know, range cattle or some other type of cattle industry. But in general terms, when they are at their skinniest is when they're at the peak milk production, and that is post-calving. They've already had their calf. Okay, so we're going to jump into what we call the milking system. So again, like I said before, one of the reasons we need cows to have really good feed is because once, twice, or 3 times, or even as much as 5 times a day, they will have to go to a milking parlor to actually get that milk removed from the system, right? And cows are extremely willing to go to the parlor. Usually requires very little effort from the humans involved with it. They feel the pressure in the udder. They're ready to go and give milk for their calf, right? They're going into the parlor to give milk to their calf. That's what their purpose is. There are 4 primary milking parlor systems. 3 of them are very popular in Arizona. The two on the top are what we call herringbone milking system and parallel milking system. They're both have peculiar characteristics to each other. The parallel milking parlor is seen often in operations that have limited space. Cows are side by side. There allows you to put more cows in that smaller space. There's some disadvantages because obviously the rear end of the cow is right on top of you when you're trying to do the job, and you're coming in from that back part. You need to put some spaces or be cognizant that they can kick backwards and get you that way. Really an interesting similar design is this herringbone, where the cattle come in at an angle. When you're the milker, you're going into that udder also at an angle, and you have a little bit more accessibility to that. The differences, the primary differences in those design is space and space availability. So that's what you see. A lot of the herds in Arizona are one of these 2 types of systems. The third system is the one you see on the bottom in the left. It's what we call a rotary parlor, and it's exactly a carousel. I mean, you guys have gone to the fair and seen these carousels. This is exactly what these cows are doing. They come in from this end right here. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but they come in from this right hand area. Actually, in here, this photo is it's transposed, so it's actually the opposite. They're coming in from the right hand side here, getting inside, and then as soon as they go into that front part, the first person in that rotary parlor will clean her udder up, and then there's a stimulate milk production, and then the second person will put the milking system, and the carousel will continue to move until they get around here. Again, the carousel is always moving, but right around here there will be another employee. And this employee is in charge of, there's an automatic takeoff system. So when the pressure of the milk reduces to a certain percentage, the system will pull off so that you don't over milk that udder and damage those teat ends, right? And then there's a person here that does the post milk treatment, which would put a disinfectant, clean again, and make sure she's ready to come back out. And then when she comes around here, this gate will open up and she will just back up, turn around, and leave. Sometimes there's a little spray of water in the front to motivate her. But again, they are pretty used to that. I think they actually enjoy going on that little carousel drive to do that. The fourth system is one that's very rare in Arizona because it's typically more associated with smaller herds because of the cost of the technology. But it's what we call robotic milking systems. And these systems require, I shouldn't say no human involvement, but they're semi-automatic, right? These cows will come in this parlor. The parlor has a robotic system that detects the position of each of the teats and will actually arrange the system and put it on automatically. And she would milk. As soon as she finishes milking, the gate opens and she leaves. They typically get fed here too. There's some incentive for them to go additionally in there. And in many cases, these are controlled, but in some cases, they are allowing the cow to come into this facility as many times as they want. But again, these are less frequent in Arizona because the investment cost per animal, you can only milk about 30 or 40 cows per robot. So if you start thinking about really, really large operations in the state of Arizona, some of them having as much as 10,000, 15,000 dairy cows, in one facility, it becomes a little bit cost prohibitive to go in that area. So just to go really basic through this cycle, and I think it's something that a lot of people often either don't know or don't remember, but we have to understand that there's one thing that needs to happen to a dairy cow for her to be a productive dairy cow, is that she has to have a calf, right? That biological process of having a baby is what makes her ready to be able to produce milk. And that baby, in a traditional sense, can be either a boy or a girl, right? If it's a boy, that one is typically going to another operation, either sold as a young livestock or taken all the way to full weight in some of these feedlot operations that we talked about that have Holstein cattle. Right now, we have something that is called sex semen. So we're able to actually inseminate the cow with a high probability of getting a female, because that's what we want. We want to continue to have females into the systems that we can replace mom when she has finished her productivity cycle. So again, farmers are taking care of this mom cow producing milk, but at the same time, all the replacement females are in that dairy typically being taken care of for up to 2 years to be able to become a productive cow into this industry too. So again, it's not all about taking care of this cow. There's a lot of other things that are going in a dairy operation that are related to taking care. And this is a typical calf hutches. And, these are movable calf hutches made out of wood, and these are the traditional plastic calf hutches. Again, if anybody's ever gone to the farm in Cochise County in Kansas Settlement, you will see what a really large operation with their hutches looks like. It almost looks like a neighborhood as you see it from an airplane. A pretty interesting way to look at it. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but guys have to understand that lactation for that cow only lasts a certain window of time. And typically we use 305 days as a cycle of lactation. So once that cow is getting to the end of that lactation, her milk production is going down because now her baby is growing up and is being able to eat other ingredients, right? So she doesn't have as high demand for milk production. So in our industry, in order for us to keep her productive, we need to breed her again so she has another calf so that she can go through another lactation cycle. So again, this is the productive cycle, especially as it relates to reproduction. We see a cow here going through 5 lactations, and then where she's bred, where she's supposed to be bred, and how this system, a cycle goes up, right? Lactations get better as the cow gets older, but there are also a lot of other factors that go into the system. So we don't have a lot of cows that get to, in large operations, they get to 5 to 6 lactations, but we have a fairly consistent production cycle, because what's important about producing milk is that milk is available all the time. We cannot produce milk for 10 months and then not produce milk for 2 months, right? We need to make sure that milk is being delivered to the supermarket every day. You guys saw maybe in the COVID crisis where milk availability was becoming an issue. And it really had nothing to do with availability of milk. It was more related to our ability to get it to the right places in a timely manner. So I'm going to, you think we're going to have a lot of questions, Peter, or should I go to the hour?
We seem to be getting them as they're coming. If you want to leave, like maybe the last 3 to 5 minutes for questions, we could probably do that.
Okay, we just have a couple of areas that I wanted to cover. Again, I think that productive cycle is something that a lot of people need to keep in mind. We expected to have a cow-calf every year, once a year. Lactation lasts around 305 days. Is a really good way to have an idea. So she gets about a 2-month vacation and recovery. In that vacation recovery, she's finalizing the growth of that fetus that's going to be her next calf and her next productive cycle. So it's a pretty streamlined, pretty effective system that allow us to have a consistent supply of milk being produced for the population. So there's a couple of other things that you guys have to know about lactation. As I said before, mom's ability to produce milk is dependent on the growth of that baby, right? I mean, she's still giving milk to her baby, even though that milk is going to the milking parlor, right? In her head, what's suckling it is the baby, right? So, and early lactation, when the animal is at its youngest, there's a lot of needs. There's a lot of nutrient needs, especially the first couple of days where the milk produces some antibodies and some other components called in the colostrum. That's a really important time period. Then they go to early lactation. And early lactation is a critical period for these cows because you think about it, She has not been making milk for 2 months. And then all of a sudden, she has a huge demand of milk because his baby is hungry all the time, right? So she has to ramp up her system to be really, really efficient in producing milk. So she achieves a peak production around 60 days. And then that milk kind of maintains there for a little while. And then she hits mid-lactation. And mid-lactation is like a prolonged curve. There's a reduction, but you're still producing a large volume of milk. And again, what's happening here is as the calf is growing, she's exploring other alternative food sources. So she's going to lose some of the need for a total milk diet, right? So in late lactation, now that we have animals that should be consuming, some grass products, some hay or some grass or whatever, if you want to compare it to a natural a system, right? So milk production starts dwindling around 200 days, and then we get to that about 305 days where she's actually starting to finalize on milk production and replenishing some of that weight that she lost in that early lactation that we talked about. So again, not for the test or the quiz, just a really quick visualization. What you're seeing here is what we call a lactation curve. And there's really important thing to understand because it tells you a lot about what's going on, okay? This line right here, it's the breeding period, right? This black line out here is the breeding period. I wish I had this. I should have made this in color. This first line that goes from less to more is the energy, okay? And this one is the milk production, okay? So one of the things that happen in milk production, I'm sorry, this dotted line is the energy. This one that goes from 0 to really high is milk production. Again, we talked about that. She's not producing milk for 2 months, and all of a sudden, boom, she has to produce a lot of milk. So this is why animals lose weight. Once cows lose, so dairy cows lose. Once she starts producing a lot of milk, I hit the wrong button. The energy that she gets from the diet is not enough to support all that milk production. So she makes that sacrifice to say, I'm going to use some body weight to compensate for that lack of energy and produce a little bit more. So if you look at this graph right here as this line over here as the weight of the cow, right? She goes from a standard weight, and as soon as she starts getting an negative energy balance, she loses weight. And then as soon as she starts dropping in milk production and energy in the diet is sufficient for that, she starts gaining the weight back again. And this is really important because if she doesn't gain this weight back again, in the next lactation, she's not going to have body stores to compensate. So she's gonna have less milk production in this period because she doesn't have a lot of energy. Again, within this, she has a breeding cycle. It starts somewhere around here, and she'll have the full cycle in there. But again, just to get a good visualization of how dairies are performing through that cycle, or dairy cows are performing through that cycle. I'll go a little bit into the feeding system. That's the area where I mostly work with. It's a really interesting career choice for many of you that are interested in science and agriculture. Dairy nutritionists are in charge of going into these operations and formulating or balancing out that salad that we talked about, right? They sit in their home with a computer and they look at the production systems. They understand what the cow needs as nutrients, how much protein, how much carbohydrate, how much minerals and vitamins, and they formulate a ration. We call it a ration, but we formulate a diet from the ingredients that the farm has available: corn, soybean, alfalfa hay, corn silage, all these ingredients, mineral mixes and individual ingredients, and they mix them together in a mixer wagon so that when they drop that feed in front of the cow, she has the most balanced diet that she can get, and that maximizes her milk production. So I said before, if you're a nutritionist, you're probably working with TMR-based diets. Obviously, some of the supplemental grazing diets employ a nutritionist, but this is where most of the nutritionists are working, right? They're trying to get some production. I mentioned here organic production because we didn't talk about it before. There is a small market segment that wants organic milk, and there are some operations that cater to that. In Arizona, we only have one organic facility, or at least one large-scale organic facility. I'm going to talk a little bit about the design here. If you're looking behind my head, you'll see what we call a Saudi-style barn. The reason they're called Saudi-style barns is because Saudi Arabia was one of the first places to implement it. But those barns were actually designed by Arizona researchers working at the University of Arizona. They got the name Saudi-style barns because they were implemented there, but that's what most of the barns in Arizona look like. There's a high roof, a lot of air circulation, right? And then cows are here most of their day, right? Under the shade, they can get feed, they can get water, typically here. And then they have these dry lots so they can get some exercise and move around if they want to. Obviously in Arizona, because of the intensity of the heat, the events of them moving into the sun area are a little limited or a little less than in other operations. You'll notice a couple of things here. We have a lot of fans. These are actually not as typical as you would think in Arizona because we need more than just moving air. We have no humidity in the air. So as you guys know, right, when you walk outside, even if you're under the shade, the air that's moving is pretty warm, right? So we need to actually cool the air. So we need to put moisture in there. So most of our fan systems have what they call sprinklers. So they'll sprinkle water, moisten the air, and then mobilize that cool down air. The other system that I talked a little bit about is what we call these freestyle barns. And these are the areas where the animals sit all day. And they're usually sand bedded or some rubber mat bedding or whatever. And they're designed for the cow to go head first, like you see them here, and have their butt sticking out. Anybody know why we want their butts to be sticking out? Well, I don't hear any answers. So, so the reason why you want them to have their butt sticking out is we don't want manure in the area where they're sitting, right? So either when they're sitting down or when they're getting up, if they, if they go to the bathroom per se, that manure is going to fall, and that urine is also going to fall outside of the bedding area. So it allows us to keep that area where she's sleeping or sitting down, fairly clean. And that's what we call the freestyle facilities. These are what we call the dry lots, and this is what you will see primarily in Arizona. These are the old school dry lots. There's a shaded area here. Animals go to the feeding station and come back to the shaded area. We still have some of those, but the vast majority of the barn design in Arizona is these Saudi-style barns where we have cooling systems. And I'll show you the cooling systems here really quick. That's a rotational grazing. I missed that. So let me not jump. These are manure separation systems. So we scrape those pens to keep it nice and clean. We bring the manure here. We separate the solids from the liquids. We use water for recycle and for irrigation and other things. And then we compost this manure and use it again for bedding. And this is an example of a feeding system. This is a mixer wagon that has that salad all well mixed in there. And they're running around by here about 2 to 3 times a day to make sure cows have fresh food all day. So I wanted to just mention these grazing operations. There are some operations that do a really good job of just feeding cows grass, right? And these are actually a little different than what most people are used to because we're actually planting the type of forage we want them to eat. So again, think about this as being the milking parlor. Cows can be in any one of these pastures and they're going to be mobilized once or twice a day. There are some advantages and disadvantages. One of the greater disadvantages is that if you have cows over here, they got to take a big hike to go all the way to the milking parlor. We want them to use that energy instead of walking large distance to actually produce more milk. So that can reduce a little bit of the efficiency of the program. But again, it's a different system in areas where grass is grown very effectively. This is actually can be very profitable a system. It would be very difficult to have this system in Arizona. Very difficult.
Dr. Diaz?
Yes.
When you were talking earlier about the robotic milking system, are there any dairies in Arizona that use that? And if so, can you say which ones?
As far as I know, there are actually no robotic systems in Arizona. There's a couple of dairies that are exploring and investigating getting into the robotic system. There may be 1 or 2 dairies that would have one robot as they're testing it out and things like that. But as I said before, the biggest limitation in robotic systems for Arizona is not necessarily the system, is the cost, right? Because if you have 200 cows, you can get by with buying 5 or 6 of these robots for the entire herd. Each of these robots can cost anywhere from $200,000 to $400,000. So if you have 10,000 cows, now the exponential number of robots that you need for that requires a significant investment. So 2 things that happen. Also, the robots tend to be a little bit slower in the process. So in our really large production system, time is really important. So the robots need to get cheaper and more efficient, faster, before we'll start seeing them in large operations. But yeah, there are operations, I think as large as 800 to 1,000 cows that are operating in robotic systems, but it's not very common. The larger operations typically still operate in traditional or semi-automatic. For example, the circular parlor, the rotary that I showed you, you can automate certain components of it, right? When the cows come in, there's some of these operations like, in Riverview and Cochise that has a automated arm that comes in, sprays the cow under and gets her with the disinfectant, both when she comes in and she comes out. So that's an automated system within a traditional parlor that allows you to remove or have less need of an employee physically being there in there.
And thank you, Dr. Diaz.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the last picture that you showed, the last slide, mm-hmm. Is there some shade for that, or would this be in a place not like in Arizona where you need a lot of shade?
Yeah, again, I mean, the shade situation is really important for us because the intensity of the daily heat production is really high. A lot of the places that have the aggressive grazing system, again, New Zealand is one of the really good examples of a country where they have really consistent grazing system, very profitable. Their climate is much more forgiving, right? The cows can be in the sun most days because the average daily temperature never reaches the point where they're uncomfortable. So yeah, in these operations, it wouldn't be necessary. In our operations, the sun will be damaging to the grass and to the cattle. And that's a good lead-off point. This is probably my last slide. We can talk about other things once we get there, but that was a good lead-off point to heat stress management, and that's one of the things that we really work on a lot at the University of Arizona. We have been working for many years, and we do a lot of research to better understand how cattle responds to high temperatures. What we have here is a table that we call the THI table, and it's THI stands for Temperature Humidity Index. And what we've done is we've calculated a way that we can add through a formula humidity and temperature to get an estimate how the cow is going to respond to that combination. And then what we end up doing is we're setting up systems like these cooling systems so that those systems can turn on as soon as the THI starts becoming problematic for their production. Obviously, this is not a typo that the cow is upside down. Any cow exposed to above 98 THI is probably not going to survive. So we're obviously not getting to this point. We're actually not even getting to this point. Most of the systems in Arizona will be very cognizant to try to keep the THI below 72 or even below 71 to make sure that they don't lose production, but also not stress those animals. I'm going to skip down through here. I want to give you guys a really good example of how this looks. This is what it would look in Arizona, right? We have sprinklers at the feeding station, sometimes to cool the cow, especially with those old traditional dry lot systems. We'll have heavy fans. This is a holding pen before they go into the parlor with a lot of misters to keep the temperature down. And then we have these systems. These actually look like air conditioners. They're like swamp coolers. We're basically cooling air and then pushing it down so that the cows are pretty comfortable in there. And at times we get a really drastic change in temperature. Let me see if I have my picture here. I usually have I didn't have it. We can get, there's a dairy operation in Arizona called Stott's Dairy. It's in Buckeye. And they actually have a little camera that shows the temperature of the outside temperature versus the temperature of their cool environment. And you can see as much as 40-degree differences. Like we'll have days that'll be 112, 115 outside. And these cows here would be at 65, 61, 62, right? I mean, even if you're working at that farm, you probably want to be here because it's really nice, a really nice environment. And that allows us to keep animals at a lot minimal stress and, a more productive environment. So those are the priorities of the industry. And I think I had a couple other slides, but I think that's a really good ending point here to, again, thank you guys for taking time of the day to be here with me. I'll answer any additional questions that you have, and we're always at your disposition. Dairy farmers love to show their farms to kids. So again, anytime I can help you guys facilitate anything like that, let me know, and I'll be happy to work with you guys.
Dr. Diaz, thank you so much. This was really an excellent presentation, right on topic and really perfect for the crowd that we have here today. For those participants or those attendees, think about when you're processing all of this. Think about the different careers that are available to you. Think about the ways, as he was talking about, the way our dairy farms are run, where science and where technology and engineering and math come together to make these dairy farms so much more successful. I mean, just the fact that he was talking about the decrease in the number of dairy cows since 1950 until today, from, I think you said it was 56 million down
26
to
million, 9.
26 million down to 9 million. I mean, that's amazing, and that's because of that efficiency with us, with the science and the engineering, bringing it all together. Yep. So be thinking about those things as you're thinking about careers for the future, or thinking about your own projects, how you can make your projects more successful through the integration of science and technology, yep, engineering, and math.
I'll add something to that, Peter. One of the most interesting and fastest growing component of our industry is the integration of technology into the dairy industry. We're starting seeing a lot of really technological advances in the dairy. Obviously, we talked a little bit about these robots, but when you think about that, some of the careers in the dairy are also evolving. Right now, we really want kids that have more a technology background, right? That they can use resources from the computer to analyze data and to look at trends and things like that. So there's a really huge need for kids that have a background in agriculture, that know what animals look like, know what production looks like, but they can also combine that with a lot of the skill sets that you guys are developing right now, with the computers, with the use of phones, with the use of technology. Right now, the phone is the most powerful equipment that dairy farmers use on a day-to-day basis. Just think about that. They have tons of computer, but 80% of their information they're utilizing from their phones. So those are really, really interesting areas, development of apps and technologies that are going to make the difference in our dairy operations and other agricultural systems in the future.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Diaz, this was very educational, I know, for me, and I'm sure that our attendees also. I know they're expressing their gratitude in the chat. Thank you so much for taking your time for us today. And for folks looking forward to tomorrow, tomorrow we'll have our equine session.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of the week.
All right, Dr. Diaz, thank you, and have a great day. Take care.